All right. Good morning, everybody. I know this is the last session, so thanks for showing up. I was chatting with some of the friends. Friday, last session, last day of the conference. I see. Before we jump into use cases for SOAR, quick show of hands. How many are familiar with SOAR, what it is at a high level? Okay, good. Good, because I'm not going to, in the session, I'm not going to cover in depth what SOAR is. We have one slide here. The goal of today's session is to share some of the use cases our customers and our partners are leveraging us for, which we had not even anticipated when we started building the product. And the whole power of the platform here you'll see is we are starting to see customers use it in a way which helps them more and more, and they can build and extend the platform rather than us as the vendor having to extend the platform. So before we jump in, like what SOAR and what use cases, the core, and I think the previous session, if you were part of the previous session here, which Anuj led, was all about what data you get and what results you want. Why SOAR is actually a question which I've been asked by many customers, like how did the space came to be around? I mean, why did the space in a matter of 3 years became such an important space in security? And the reason is if you look at how SOC or how security operations was operating, there's a large number of data set which used to come in, and people were expecting results, whether it's to take an alert and go respond to it or take certain action. And this big machine that you see in the middle between the data and the result was very static in nature, rules, and some machine learning coming in there. But the idea is to do what you want from a customization perspective was very restrictive. And that is where SOAR stepped in, which is the logic, the rules are not just static rules that if then that, it's a playbook, it's a workflow, and that is the power of SOAR. In terms of how the data resulted into problems, and it's very interesting, like in a lot of spaces people say more data is better. In the security space, we saw challenges. I mean, this is some actual data from a survey which we did last year. Customers pointed out they get 174,000 alerts per week. This is the log data that they're coming in. Now, depending on your efficacy of the SIM and your rules or your machine learning algorithms, you might get less and you might be able to handle it. But still, no matter which customer I've talked to, they drop a number of alerts on the floor without looking at them. 30+ point products, and I think this is very interesting that these are not all security products, right? If you look at just the endpoint, the sandbox, the authentication to your firewall, your network IPS, maybe combined into a next generation firewall, but effectively the products that you need to look at from either enriching the data or from responding to, we saw 30+ products in customer environments. The last one is typically any real alert takes 4 days to respond to. In fact, even phishing reports in most of our customers took more than 3 days to go look at and investigate and report to. So pretty bad place from how fast can we respond to things and what the teams have to go through. What does SOAR deliver? The SOAR, in my mind, has 3 core value props. One is orchestration, and the idea of orchestration is whatever logic or workflow you have for handling an alert, you could put it down into a workflow engine and automate it if it could be automated. Or even if it could not be automated, at least it's laid down in a playbook in a visual manner so that you are able to follow it step by step. That orchestration piece needs to include not only automating the third-party products, which is taking actions on them like blocking, or pure enrichment, but also should be able to interact with the end user or interact with the analyst for approval workflows, for collecting more data. And the third part of that orchestration engine, it should be able to operate on the ticket or the case itself. And they are very, very different. If you look at neighboring spaces, whether it's workflow engines on the IT side, this whole space called robotic process automation, there are tools which just interact with the machines or other tools, but they don't do anything with the end user. Data collection, getting approval workflows, escalation approval workflows, timers like, hey, the person did not respond to. And there are other tools which only focus on the human workflows but do not work with the third-party products. So it's important from an orchestration perspective to have all these pieces together. Now, when it comes to automation, and there's a lot of questions, how is automation different from orchestration? I think of automation as a subset of that whole orchestration flow. And the idea is you should be able to have automation scripts connecting with third-party tools. The integrations should be extensible. And what I mean by extensible is if in your environment there is a new tool which the SOAR products such as Demisto do not integrate with out of the box, can you as customer or partner build it yourself? Can you build that integration with an SDK? So extensible automation is an important piece, and then being able to execute those automations across each of these tools. The third piece is more about the process, more about the people. And this is an important, very, very important aspect of SOAR, which is case management collaboration. Demisto specifically was, we could safely claim, the first product in this space to kind of look at all these components and bring the ticketing and automation together. And this is actually a very important piece which customers ask, like, no, I already have a ticketing system in my environment. We are focused more on orchestration. How would that work? We absolutely integrate with every ticketing system out there, whether it's ServiceNow from an IT perspective or in the security environments, you have something else in the SOC. But the long-term value of tying automation and ticketing is immense. Once you start based on the data that is coming in from third-party products and automation, if you're able to change the escalation of the ticket, change who the ticket is assigned to, roles, they become super important. And then vice versa, which is if you change something in the ticket, can you trigger a workflow? Can you run an automation when a field changes? So the whole point of keeping tickets separate where an analyst puts in the notes and other pieces and keeping the automation separate is very inefficient. And that is why from a SOAR perspective, these come together. And SOAR becomes the platform where once the alert is generated from your data platform of choice, SIM, Cortex Data Lake, some other Elasticsearch, from there on, after the journey of the alert, all the way till that alert is investigated, closed, collaboration, talking with your peers, that all happens in the SOAR platform. Talking of the word communication and collaboration, and this is somewhat unique to us, there's a very important concept that we emphasize with our customers, and it's super powerful once customers start to use this concept of chat ops. All the integrations that exist are not only available in a playbook format, but you're able to interactively launch them. So I can go to a bot, so we call it dbot, and run a command says, go to Active Directory and get user details for this particular user. Go to my firewall and see if this particular IP is blocked or not based on rules. These are actions which could either run automatically in a playbook or an analyst can trigger it with a bot in a communicative manner. It's chat ops. So structured commands could be triggered. So that's in essence what a SOAR platform is. And overall, it is a platform which ties together. There's another phrase we're starting to use, the operating system, for your security operations. Everything from the point the alert is generated, the analyst can do in this one place, all documented, all audited. Now, here are some use cases which we have seen. Pretty much majority of these use cases started with some sort of an alert. Obviously, the incident management and security operations was the first place. All kind of alerts, so we integrate with SIM and analytics, EDR solutions, cloud security alerts. No matter what your alerts are, we integrate with those, we bring them in, Playbook runs, and then we are able to either enrich or respond across the tool set. Let's talk of some of the use cases here, right? So typically, from an incident management perspective, we have, of course, seen the phishing being the most common use case. Pretty much everybody has a problem that there's tons of phishing alerts which come in, large organization even in millions in a month, and being able to respond effectively to them is one big piece. But not just phishing, any type of alert that your SIM generates, common use case. Cloud security, vulnerability, and the OT use cases are somewhat new. They're still in the same category, I would say, which is alert response. Cloud security is a very interesting one. So we started to integrate with cloud platforms about a year and a half ago. And what we saw was a ton of responses from a cloud security perspective go to the infrastructure. So how do you respond to an alert which says, you have a public world open policy for an S3 bucket. You need to go shut down that bucket policies. And that's a response to the AWS infrastructure. So we started to see that a lot of the cloud security responses need to go back to the AWS infrastructure as such. So we integrate with not only the security tools, but the infrastructure tools themselves to be able to do those things. And there's lots and lots of use cases on the cloud security side, including open S3 bucket, including open ports when you see of a security group, when a new VM is spin up. Some of our customers call them policy violations more than the threat violations. And then there are threat-related alerts on the security, cloud security side, like, hey, somebody is using an AWS instance for Bitcoin mining. Right? And a perfect example where there's no data loss, but it's still the machine is being misused. And in that scenario, how do you respond effectively? The vulnerability management is another area, and I don't have a dedicated slide on this, but we have seen many customers now start to use us for vulnerability management and response. What that means is, if you look at any typical organization, and there was a presentation done at the Ignite USA by one of our customers, WestJet. It's available on YouTube. You should look it up. The idea is the vulnerability management tools generate a report which says, these are the devices that are vulnerable. And typically in a large organization, you will have multiple departments, each running their vulnerability management tools on their apps because they need to schedule it. That report needs to be then centrally consolidated by the vulnerability management team, prioritized, which is effective, which is important, based on the asset criticality. After you have prioritized that, then you need to take it back to IT, and they will trigger patching. Now, this flow takes a lot of time, typically almost a month, even if you have a dedicated person doing this, because there are all these disconnected sources. The data needs to be downloaded into Excel sheets, managed, mapped, prioritized, all of that stuff, mess. And by the time you deliver it to IT, your next vulnerability scan is run. So you're easily a month and a half behind what you want. This, they automated with a playbook. Effectively, it connects to all your vulnerability scanners, brings the data back in, connects to your asset source, whether it's Active Directory or some other asset database, uses the criticality there to prioritize, then goes either opens a ticket, then it actually asks an analyst to go review and approve, because you do want that human in the loop to go look at what are we pushing. Then either it can trigger some patches if you think integrate with a patching system, or it opens IT tickets in ServiceNow or whatever, but still with the right relevant data. So the whole point of human collecting this data, that's not needed. Super fast, so in a matter of hours from the vulnerability scan data coming in, you have the right information to the IT teams to be able to go patch these systems. So that becomes an extremely, extremely powerful use case. And then some of our customers on the operations technology side, oil and natural gas customers, are starting to deploy this in OT environments where they would, similar to vulnerability detections or device discovery, but the responses might be different, but there's tons of use cases again from that. So that's what I would say I'm calling them conventional use cases because we have seen them, customers have implemented them. Now let's look at some use cases which are somewhat different, somewhat also peripherally including security teams, not the SOC teams, but they do include the security teams and they go out. But before we jump into use cases, it's interesting. I mean, I sat down and did this exercise internally and then with the customers, like, why are people using SOAR to go address use cases which we did not anticipate? And there's actually like really 4 core components why we see this is a really powerful way to automate and orchestrate. One, the way we built the SOAR platform, Demisto platform, is open and extensible. Building an integration with whatever is extremely easy. And I actually mean whatever. We internally, and will not get into the use cases we have done internally, but even when a customer, one of the customer use cases, they integrated with the travel portal system to figure out where the employee is currently right now. And that information, that is the employee in the home base or is they traveling to an international location, is very powerful. Security can use that in a lot of different ways. And they integrated with the travel management system for that. So the point is, open extensible integrations based on API can help you really, really automate use cases or go to use cases which are not traditionally there. Workflow logic. If you are able to make the workflow engine flexible and modular, not just tied to the very specific security data, but it can take data, transform it, build logic around those use conditions, that's a very important piece. So integrations let you connect to different systems to call API. Generic workflow logic lets you go build workflow across. Third piece, which goes to more ticketing and case management side, is can you have customizable layouts? Why is that important? Let's say you're going into use cases, and we're going to see some of these use cases, which is you need to display the right set of information to the analyst at the right time. And if the layout of that data that you see is not flexible enough, then those use cases are not that powerful because you can automate stuff, but how you present the information to the user needs to be completely different. And this is one of the powerful things. If you look at the Demisto product, a phishing incident looks completely different than a malware incident because the data that you need to show the user for a phishing incident is what was the from address for phishing, what domain did it originate from, what is the email body, versus in malware you need what system was affected, who's the owner of that system, what OS is that system. And if you can represent this in completely different layouts, then you can expand to use cases. Use cases including non-security use cases, IT use cases, because how you see the data is completely different. So integrations, workflow logic, and then how is the data laid out is super important. And the fourth reason is very much, I call it engineering reason, but a very powerful reason why like how we architected the product affects us to go into other areas, is the content to change all those 3 different pieces is separate from the product. Which means if you want to go into a new arena or do a new use case or change the layout, you don't need to come to the product team to change the code. That is configurable, and we call it content. You can change any of those 3 things, build a new content pack, and export it and deliver it to a customer if you are a partner developing this. And or you can move from one system to another. So this modularity of decoupling the product and the content is very important. So if we send a new release of product next time, the content modifications that you made, changing the playbook, the layout, the integrations, are not affected, they are not overridden. And that distinction, I do not think many products out there make, which is any of these use case modifications and the layouts and other pieces are treated as content, including dashboards, and they're not tied to a product release. So your rev cycle could be much faster. We can build new content packs much faster. So these are really the core tenets of why now if you take a SOAR platform, you can start to go to many, many, many different use cases. Let's see what use cases are there. Employee onboarding, and it's very interesting. I did not expect this because this use case typically is a blend of HR, IT, security. When you onboard and offboard an employee, it touches everybody. And that is why it's actually a big problem. So if you look at the challenges, it's endless manual tickets, right? I mean, we actually are working with a customer. They onboard or offboard 800 employees/contractors a month. 800 a month employee or contractors. And the time effectively there and the standardization that you need is crazy. Because if you do not offboard employee in a consistent manner, you might leave services. Even if, this is even if you have a very strong single sign-on and IAM process, there will be systems which are not connected to SSO. There will be things that you need to do from an offboarding perspective. In some systems, you may want to, from an offboarding perspective, you may want to take the data and move that data into a different directory. So employee playbook, the customer playbook example was, when you offboard an employee, the box account that they may have for the file sharing, you might want to take that data and take that data, give it to the manager of that employee. Or you may want to take that data or archive it for compliance purposes, depending on your industry. My point is, it's not only just turning off that account. There is data implications, there are other pieces from an onboarding, offboarding perspective. So a standard, repeatable, automatable process becomes very, very, very important. So here's an example of the playbook. This is simplistic in nature. I didn't want to show every step, but from an onboarding perspective, and this we have seen customers using it, this we have seen we use it internally at Demisto, assign an onboarding task. So start when your HR system triggers it, you're assigning it an HR representative, creating an email address, that could be a different environment, checking Salesforce if you needed it or not based on the department of the employee, going and creating those accounts, setting up travel accounts, setting up admin tasks. Some of these would still be manual, but documenting them becomes very powerful to say account created in this system, account creating this system, tying it to IAM and mapping it. All of those pieces could be automated and centralized. Now, again, the purpose of this session is to kind of showcase some of the use cases that customers have done. This is not a playbook that is in the system out of the box, because this kind of use case is very, very, very custom to the organization. A smaller company would do it differently than a larger company. But the point is, this is an example of a use case which affects everybody. A lot of our customers are starting to do it, and they would start with either only focusing on the IT system side or identity side on how do you map the accounts, and or could go broader. So smaller customers would go broader. Larger customers would take only piece of employee onboarding and go run that. So that's kind of one use case which we are starting to see emerge more and more across the board. Second use case is user access. And then I think this user access basically is when you get a user access alert, multiple failure, people call it multiple failed login attempts as well. You could classify that as a typical SOC use case, but It sometimes is not, right? You do not want to do a full investigation or a multiple failed login attempt. You might want to use an end user for this. So this came up quite often as well in customers, which is maybe it's an inadequate attempt, right? The person might tried the password wrong 3 times because they recently changed it. Maybe it's an entry point for bigger attacks. And then as you have a global employee base, how do you contact them? How do the communication happen with the employee becomes interesting. So this is a playbook which, again, another customer did, and very powerful. You start by saying, if you see multiple failure login attempt, can you go out of band to the employee, either via Slack or text messaging, and ask them, is it you who tried to log in from this new device and failed? And in most cases, if you already have that communication channel, which is an out-of-band communication channel like a Slack or a text message, then you're able to easily validate whether the employee made a mistake and typed it in, or they actually are being compromised because somebody else is attacking them. And based on the result of what the employee responds, you could go either reset the password or say, hey, transition the alert to a security person to go investigate, either which way. So this one looks extremely simple, but the point here is the volume of such alerts we have seen. The self-service that, hey, I can set my 2-factor auth by myself is a lot of those. Another slight modification of this, I have seen every September, October, new iPhone, new Android phones are released, and employee come in to reset my entire 2-factor auth. So that is not like a failure scenario, but a slight modification to this, which is, hey, I have a new phone, I need to set my 2-factor auth again. And in that scenario, they come in. You can make that complete self-service. They come in, file an issue. We pick up Demisto picks up the issue from ServiceNow or whatever your internal service management tool is. Take that, go to your 2-factor auth, reset that, gets delivered to employees. Nobody needs to ever touch that. So this whole access management and access dealing from an end user perspective can absolutely help reduce the load of something that is not, does not require a human intervention. So that's another one. Let's talk SSL certificate. And this one has been a use case which only a handful of customers have tried, but very interesting, again, showing the modularity and extension of the platform. SSL certificate management. So this use case was a medical technology company which provides the backbone to connect any pharmacy and hospital. So they are a large organization in US which connects the Walgreens and CVS's of the world to the hospitals. So basically, they provide the software stack, and when a prescription flows from a hospital to the pharmacy, it runs on that backbone. Now, of course, since they provide this backbone, they need to provide the SSL certificate issued to the hospitals, to the pharmacies. They expire regularly. So the challenges was the following. They were having trouble maintaining the integrity of SSL certificate across these endpoints. And how would they make sure that they don't expire and cause service outage? So before the certificate expires, can you notify, generate a new one, deliver it to the right person? So there was a lot of manual housekeeping work going on here to just pulling that. In this case, they integrated with Vennaphi, which maintains all their certificate store. You would query that regularly and says, give me all these certificates that are going to expire in the next 30 days. Then, based on that certificate metadata, they would go query from Salesforce in this case, or whatever the CRM is, who is the owner of that certificate, which customer do I need to go notify that this certificate is going to expire, inform that user, and hopefully they go update it. If they don't update it, then keep checking the status and escalate. So this interesting use case includes the approval workflow, reminding the user workflow, connecting to systems all in one. A perfect example from an orchestration where you need the human touch reminder, collecting the response back, did they update or not, and then pulling in the security tools to do that. So this particular use case, from their perspective, was helping avoid all the manual work, but also avoid the outage. If somebody has to do this manually, they need to be really, really thorough that certificate does not expire and cause some sort of a system problem. And they were able to run this very, very, very effectively. The next one is GDPR breach notification, an example where not about automation, but about the process. From a problem perspective, I don't need to educate this group on the problem statement. And I think just the breach notification piece in that scenario is very, very cumbersome. In this case, and this playbook is part of our standard product, we actually had our research team go look at and figure out what needs to be done. The reason why I included this example is because this is a perfect example of a process and a workflow rather than machine automation. So the amount of automation that we do here is somewhat limited, but this is an example of a playbook to walk through an analyst step by step of what they need to do from a notification perspective. So it's the process side, is the human side. And what this playbook did was notifying the DPO of suspected data breach, confirming if the DPO to confirm if the breach has occurred or not, and if they did, then what happens. If it was no, then close the incident, confirming risk to individuals. And there are SLAs involved here, which is important. So the system can actually track, like we notified at this time, did we get a response by this time? So measuring the time between different stages of an incident, measuring the time between different steps, tying that back to the SLA, which your compliance regulation requires, super important. And it's not just GDPR, it's now CCPA in California and in other places, other data privacy requirements. The idea is the system being flexible enough to even go for pure process and measuring the SLAs of different steps of the process. So this is an example where it could be other compliance processes. We have seen customers' internal quarterly audit compliance processes running this. So the process side could be managed as well because this is a generic workflow engine. Another use case, and this is a customer out of San Francisco, compliance use case. But this compliance use case is evaluating the technology vendors. As they onboard new technology vendors, they need to go through a checklist, right? So vendor onboarding. This is a GRC-like use case. And the big idea and the big problems there is there's varies level of vendor risk. So they have a vendor assessment questionnaire, certain set of questions, and that is the question that they use to evaluate. And once they evaluate, they need to maintain all of that information centrally of what did the vendor submit. In a large organization, this is done in a GRC system. And that is a hugely manual process, how the data is collected, how it's analyzed. There is no automation to analyze the data, even if it is collected very well. And this becomes a big problem. So this particular customer is using us for the vendor onboarding, and the playbook is somewhat like this. So they engage the requester, they send a form. Demisto lets them send a form, or they integrate with whatever their other form management system is and says, this is the set of questions I need you to answer. The vendor fills in that data comes in here. Based on the input, you have automations to assign a vendor risk. And if it is a high-risk vendor, then you set an SLA for somebody to go review what was missing, what is the risk, and then they can update the vendor risk based on that meeting, or they can completely say, hey, we're not going to engage with this vendor because it's high risk. And if it is not a high risk vendor, then you send them to a steering team or your internal team, whatever it is, approve the vendor, give them an email address and other pieces. Typical workflow, important piece again, this is a perfect example where you use the data flow capabilities and looking at the data that comes back, assigning risk, changing the risk of the ticket itself. So the workflow operating on and working on the ticket itself becomes an important piece rather than an integration with a security tool scenario. So those are the core use cases that we are starting to emerge and starting to see emerge. There is a tons of other use cases which we are using as internally. So much so we have seen internally we use it for some of the DevOps purposes, integrating with Ansible and doing other things. The goal of this session is not to kind of say, hey, go use this as the automation platform across the environment. The point is within the security teams, when we initially envisioned SOAR, the whole idea of doing an alert response, we are starting to see customers leverage this in other security teams, which are not alert response use cases. They are scheduled tasks, monthly tasks that you would want to do, which involve doing different pieces of automation. And a platform like Demisto is able to extend to those use cases very effectively. So that's all I had in the presentation. We have some time for any questions that the team might have. So I would love to take questions from the audience. Does it have, yes?
We have seen a lot of overlaps between the SOAR and other solutions. For example, you are talking about surface management disk. Most of now solutions, they provide automation. SIM solution, there is some tasks, you mentioned that, already covered in SIM solution, correlation, risk management, vendor risk management. So you focus on something, overlapped between those. I believe there are many use cases. For example, phishing simulation. We are suffering and from being investigating and wasting our analyst time in checking the phishing simulation things. I believe there are many use cases would be beneficial, rather than having those things. So,
So that's actually interesting, right? So I think there's a couple of things you mentioned here, right? One is I think clearly there is an overlap. When you think of in any other space also, when you build a platform which is generic and modular, it will have overlaps with point solutions. And we have seen this in our customers, right? Risk, right? There's always has been a risk dashboard in every SIM out there. As I mentioned, I think this goes back to that slide which had those 4 reasons why SOAR is interesting for other areas, is because if a point solution serves the purpose in a very restricted manner, because it's not that modular, that's fine. I don't say that you guys move to SOAR just for the sake of moving to SOAR. The power of SOAR being used for this platform comes in from the modularity and the customizability. And that is actually the most important piece, because yes, you can absolutely do risk assessment in your GRC solution, but are you able to do automated go to a security tool and bring in some more data into the GRC? Are you able to do all the workflow management and communications? Maybe, maybe not. And if it is not doable there, then you need to move to a generic automation platform. And I think this is what's happening across the industry. If you see, the reason why the workflow systems are coming into play is because if it is a very fixed, predefined workflow which the vendor defined works for an organization, good. That's the world we have been living in. But if it is not meeting the need, that is when the SOAR-like platforms expand. So you start with a cookie cutter use case and you expand from there. And that is where you'll see overlaps. And I think the right way to make that decision is, does the fixed solution that you get in that one product meet the need or not? And there, by the way, phishing is a good example where pretty much any anti-phishing solution out there, I'm not going to name vendors, they all have automation built in. In fact, some of them actually call it SOAR for phishing. And that's exactly the point, which is it's SOAR for phishing, it only meets the phishing needs. As soon as that phishing incident needs to tie to a malware and do more than that, it does not work. So the point is, how can you do this modularly with large number of integrations, with large number of playbooks, which are completely customizable?
The other questions? Who's the right individual or staff who could work on SOAR?
Oh, that is actually a good question. I'll repeat the question. Who's the right individual or the staff to work on SOAR? I think this is evolving. I'll give examples from what the successful implementations we have seen in our customers. It also varies on the size of the customer and how much resources you can put in. I strongly recommend that if you are an organization who's going to go use SOAR for use cases which are beyond come pre-baked, pre-built in, to have actually a person whose title is a SOAR engineer, a security engineer, security automation engineer, you name your title, security ninja, call them whatever you want to call them. But the mindset there is a developer mindset. They don't need to be a very strong software developer. They should know coding best practices, even better if they know Python, that's awesome. But have a dedicated person whose job is to customize, to build playbooks. Now, the benefit of that is, it says, hey, you're going to add a headcount to me. We have seen what happens is when there is this person doing this, they kind of go pick up the next use case. So you will find immediate savings because their job is to automate. So they're going to go in and says, hey, here's another use case that I can help you automate. Here's another use case that I can help you automate. We have seen some customers in a matter of like 5-6 weeks, they have 17 or so different playbooks across different use cases when there is a person whose job is to build automations. Now, that may not work in smaller organizations. And in these smaller organizations, what we have seen happen more often is what they would do is they would take the SOC engineer and they are the ones who are starting with this. Works fine because I think most of the use cases when you start with SOC, but if you are really an organization who needs to go beyond to use cases like these, consider putting a SOAR engineer.
Will it be, let us say, I'm caring about the small organization or let us say medium. There are many challenges, to implement all of these advanced protection solutions. So will it be, if we are, let us say, for example, MSSP. So will it be easy to assign one guy who's SOAR, let us say, consultant, just plug and play, doing same use cases here and there, or he should understand the whole environment in each?
I think that's actually a fantastic question. So this question was about MSSP. And the question is whether you assign one person who kind of builds use cases across the environment or go understand each. I think it depends. I would actually recommend go use cases across, build the same piece with modularity and customization in the playbook. So you can say, pause here, ask the question, do not automate fully end to end. Try to do it generally. in a generic manner, the playbook should be generic because the systems, again, at least Demisto, lets you build a playbook in the master tenant from an MSSP and then trickle it down to each tenant. Build that generic, go there, have place for sub-playbooks or general tasks which in the subtenant could do differently. The endpoint tool might be different, but the playbook could be defined as a playbook which can work with different endpoint tools. So there is opportunity to do it generically. It's not one size fits all, though. It will depend on how different the environments are there, though.
Thanks.
Of course. Other questions? Cool. I think I did a better job than I expected. No questions. Well, thank you, everybody. I know it's end of day. Feel free to reach out to me or the team. I didn't put in my email address. It's easy, Rishi at Palo Alto Networks. Happy to answer questions. And I'll be around after the session as well. Thank you.